Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. And today, we're being joined by Jordan Goldrich, author of Workplace Warrior, People Skills for the No BS Executive. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Paul.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
I am ready.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I think for me, the most important thing that I didn't do was to do some market research up front on my audience. So I think it's decide who your audience is and what your purpose is. Do you want to be a thought leader, for instance? Do you want to promote other services? So I'm an executive coach, so it really was for that purpose. Or, are you trying to add to the conversation in general, and then find out how your audience thinks about what you're offering. What is the value they would get from it? What is the pain that they have? What is the reward they will get from the book? And structure your communication that way.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, besides the fact that I procrastinated for a real long time and I needed somebody to sit on my shoulder and reprimand me when I hadn't done my chapters, for me it was choosing what kind of publisher am I going to have. There's the choice of a standard publisher, there's self-publishing, and then there's this other thing called a hybrid, which is somewhere in between self-publishing. And I actually ended up doing the hybrid, but making that decision was, for me, the most difficult piece.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, well, I have to admit that my overall book launch strategy, I wouldn't describe it as terrible, but I would describe it as adequate. So I certainly have built up my LinkedIn, and I published all over that. My publisher was Greenleaf, and they offered me the opportunity of getting into some of the big bookstores, and they did get me into Barnes & Noble, so I did that. And ultimately, I also published a podcast, but that took me a while to develop. So those are the three things that I did. It has resulted in my getting some visibility, and in my book, my publisher says that my book sales are not great, but she's seen a lot worse. So I guess that says something for how important marketing is.
Well, you mentioned something that was interesting about getting into big bookstores. So was there any particular strategy with that, or was the publisher mainly doing that for you?
The publisher did that. I had to pay for that.
Got it. And what did they charge you to do that, just to get into those big bookstores?
If I recall correctly, it was something like $1,000. It might have been $1,500, but they introduced me to bookstores both in the United States and internationally.
And then was it were you building relationships with them as well? Was the publisher basically set up an intro, or what was the process with that and getting your books into those stores?
I'm not 100% sure what the process was, which is probably another example for your audience not to do, is to make sure you know what the process is. But I did, Barnes & Noble in particular, I found out that I had which stores had ordered the book. And I did do some, I'm blocking on what they're called, but when the author shows up, book signings at the store. But then COVID hit, and that sort of put an end to everything.
Well, in regards to books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, the book that that was a hard question to answer when, as I thought about answering that question. And the one that I chose is Marshall Goldsmith's book, what got you here won't get you there. So I am an executive coach, and I work with executives who are experienced as abrasive. And Marshall is probably the best known coach in the world who works with that kind of folks. And so his book is really written to the abrasive executive about what you need to do in order to change that. And the idea is that as a leader, or as anything, no matter what you're doing, you get to a certain point based on what you know and how you know it and what you've learned and who you are. And then at a certain point, things get more complex and it just doesn't work anymore. So that is a very valuable book for me.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Well, my favorite quote, and there are several, but the one that I chose is General Norman Schwarzkopf's quote, which is that leadership is a potent combination of strategy and character. And if you have to be without one, be without the strategy. And for me personally, as a human being, integrity and character are really, really critical. And I really work extremely hard at that. And so there's so many leadership books out there these days that I just thought this was one of the clearest quotes on what it is that it takes to be a leader.
Jordan, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, so if people were wanting to have a strategy conversation with me, complimentary, they could get to me at my web page called workplacewarriorinc.com. And they could also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. They could also email me at jordangoldrich.com.
Jordan, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
My pleasure.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.